The wind howled across the empty plains of ice. It was not a gentle breeze, but a blade of frozen air cutting through the endless white. The sun was only a pale circle behind thick clouds, barely strong enough to cast a shadow. Everything looked dead, silent, and endless. Ethan trudged forward, his boots sinking deep into the snow. Each step was a battle against exhaustion. Each breath burned like fire in his lungs. The cold on this planet was not natural, it was alive. It wanted to swallow everything. His survival suit blinked red warnings. Oxygen low, power failing. He knew he wouldn't last long out here. Not alone. Hours earlier, his small shuttle had been hit by debris from the asteroid field. The controls failed, alarms screamed, and before he could stabilize the craft, it had plummeted from orbit. He remembered the fire, the crash, the sound of tearing metal. Now all that was left of his ship was a smoking wreck half buried in ice behind him. Ethan was a human soldier, part of a reconnaissance unit sent to map unclaimed sectors. The mission was supposed to be simple: scan, report, and return, but now, with communication offline and supplies lost, his only goal was survival. He activated his scanner, hoping to find a shelter or heat source nearby. The screen flickered and then something appeared. A faint signal, weak but steady, not human. He hesitated, staring at the blinking dot on the display. It was risky, maybe dangerous, but it was also the only sign of life on this frozen world. He adjusted his direction and started walking toward it. The storm grew stronger, snow swirling like smoke around him. He could barely see more than a few meters ahead, but he pressed on. The signal grew stronger, the distance closing slowly after what felt like an eternity. He saw it, something dark in the snow. At first he thought it was wreckage, but as he came closer he froze. It was a figure. Lying face down, half buried in frost, he rushed forward and turned the body over. It was not human. The creature's skin was pale green, smooth and faintly glowing beneath the ice. Her face was sharp but beautiful, eyes closed, lips trembling. Ethan recognized the uniform. Trelawney Empire, the enemy. The very species humanity had been fighting for decades. For a moment he stood there, torn. She was breathing barely. The readings on his scanner showed her body temperature dropping rapidly. She would die within minutes if he did nothing. Logic screamed to leave her, but something inside him refused. He had seen too much death already. He couldn't just walk away. He removed his own thermal blanket and wrapped it around her. Then he lifted her carefully. The weight light but awkward in his arms. He could feel her faint heartbeat through the fabric. Every step back toward his crashed pod felt heavier. The wind pushed against him, trying to take both of them. But he didn't stop. Inside the broken pod, the heater still worked weakly. He laid her beside it and activated the emergency power core. Warm air began to flow slowly. He watched her face, hoping for a sign of life. Minutes passed, then she gasped, a sharp breath that broke the silence. Her eyes opened, glowing golden like molten light. She looked around in panic, then at him. Her voice was soft but filled with fear. "Human," she whispered, her accent strange and musical. He nodded, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You were freezing." She stared at him, confused, as if his kindness was something she couldn't understand. "Why? Help me?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "Because," he said finally, "no one deserves to die alone in the cold." She blinked slowly, still trembling, her eyes never leaving his. Something in her expression softened, but before either could speak again, a sound pierced the air. The scanner beeped, once. Then again, a signal, strong and near. Ethan grabbed his weapon and checked the display. It wasn't from his ship and it wasn't human. He looked at her, and her golden eyes widened in fear. "They are coming," she whispered. "Who?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "My people," she said quietly. "The Drelani." The wind outside began to howl louder, and distant lights flickered across the snowy horizon. Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster. He knew what that meant if they found him here with her. They'd kill him without hesitation, and maybe her too. The heater hummed softly as the cold pressed closer. Two enemies alone together, surrounded by death and snow, neither trusting, neither hating, both caught between survival and loyalty. The storm outside raged, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of engines grew louder. The night was far from over. The cold wind outside still screamed through the cracks of the broken pod. Ethan sat near the small heater, his hands trembling slightly across from him. The alien woman lay motionless, her breathing slow but steady. The warmth had started to return to her skin, soft green light pulsing beneath the surface. He stared at her in silence, unsure what to think. He had seen her kind before. Drellani soldiers, tall, proud, ruthless in battle. They were enemies, but here she looked fragile, lost, almost human. He wondered what command would say if they knew he was helping her. Maybe they'd call him a traitor. Maybe worse, but he pushed the thought away. Because right now, none of that mattered. The heater flickered weakly and the light danced across her face. Her eyes fluttered open again, slow and uncertain. For a moment, confusion filled her expression, then fear. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. "Easy," Ethan said softly, raising a hand. "You're safe here." She looked around, recognizing the human symbols on the equipment. Her lips parted slightly. "Human craft," she whispered. He nodded. "Crash landed, same as you." Her golden eyes narrowed, glowing faintly in the dim light. "You should have left me," she said quietly. Her voice shaking, Ethan frowned. "Why would I do that?" She looked at him like he was speaking another language. "Because we are enemies," she said. "Your people kill mine," Ethan sighed. "Yeah, they do," he said. "But that doesn't mean I have to." Her gaze softened slightly, confusion mixing with curiosity. It was as if no one had ever said that to her before. She tried again to sit up, and this time Ethan helped her. Her body trembled, her breathing shallow but steady. He handed her a canteen of water, and she hesitated. "Go on," he said. "It's clean." She took it slowly, drank, and then looked at him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," he replied. "And you?" She paused, her eyes flickering. "Lyra," she said finally. "Scout of the Drellani Vanguard." Ethan smiled faintly. "Well, Lyra, you're lucky I found you." For a moment, silence filled the room again. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater. Ethan leaned back, staring at the frozen window. "You were part of the fleet that attacked the mining colony?" he asked quietly. She hesitated before answering. "Yes," he nodded slowly. "I was stationed there." Her eyes widened, but before she could speak, he raised a hand. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "I'm not here for revenge." She looked at him, puzzled, her mind struggling to understand this strange human. Outside, the storm grew louder, snow beating against the metal walls. Inside, the temperature slowly climbed, a fragile warmth in the middle of endless winter. Lyra stared into the small heater's light, her expression softening. Her voice trembled slightly. "Why help me, Ethan?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I couldn't just walk away," he said quietly. "I don't care what side you're on. Freezing to death isn't how anyone should go." Lyra blinked slowly, the glow in her eyes dimming to a warm gold. "You humans are strange," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "We get that a lot." She looked at him again, longer this time. There was something in his face she couldn't explain. No hatred, no fear, just calm determination. He reminded her of stories she'd heard as a child, tales of old warriors who helped even their foes. It made no sense, yet it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The scanner suddenly beeped again. Ethan's smile faded, he checked the screen. Another signal, stronger this time, closer. Lyra's expression changed instantly, fear flashing across her face. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's not human," she said. "It's a Drellani patrol." Ethan froze. "Your people?" She nodded, panic rising in her voice. "If they find me with you, they'll kill us both." Ethan grabbed his weapon, checking the charge. "How far?" "Less than a kilometer," she said, listening, her ears twitching slightly. "They're scanning for life signs." Ethan looked at her, then at the door. "Can we hide?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "They'll detect your heat signature." He clenched his jaw, thinking fast. "What if they think you're dead?" She hesitated, then looked at him sharply. "You mean, hide you under me?" He nodded. "If they see only your body frozen, maybe they'll leave." Lyra swallowed hard. "That might work," she said softly. "But if they come inside, then we improvise," he replied, loading his blaster. The sound of engines grew louder. A blinding blue light flashed across the ice outside. Scanning, Lyra quickly lay down near the heater. pretending to be unconscious again. Ethan turned off the power, plunging the pod into shadow. Only faint starlight illuminated the frozen cracks in the wall. The rumble of the ship came closer, closer until it felt like the ground itself trembled. Ethan crouched beside her, hand tight on his weapon. Lyra whispered without opening her eyes. "If we survive this, I will owe you my life," Ethan smirked faintly, his voice low. "Let's survive first." A shadow passed over the small window, followed by footsteps in the snow. Then a beam of light pierced through the crack in the wall. Scanning the interior, Ethan held his breath. Lyra didn't move, her skin pale and still. The light lingered, then faded. The sound of engines started to fade away. They had passed, at least for now. Ethan exhaled slowly. His hand still shaking, Lyra opened her eyes, her golden gaze glowing softly in the darkness. "You risked your life for me again," she whispered. He shrugged. "Guess it's becoming a habit." For the first time she smiled. A small, uncertain smile that made the frozen pod feel a little warmer. But as peace began to return, the scanner beeped once more. Ethan turned to it, his face going pale. Another signal, much stronger. Heading straight toward them, Lyra's smile faded, and she whispered the words he dreaded to hear. This time, "It's not Drellani." The faint hum of the scanner filled the broken pod, a small sound that carried heavy meaning. Ethan stared at the flickering red light on the screen. His breath slow and uneasy. Lyra leaned closer, her golden eyes reflecting the dim glow, her voice trembling slightly. "That signal, it's not from my people," she said. "It's human." Ethan frowned, confused. "A rescue team?" She shook her head. "No, the frequency is wrong." He looked again and his stomach twisted. The signal pattern was one he knew well. It belonged to a combat drone, an automated machine used by his own faction during wartime. The problem was, it shouldn't be here. How could a drone find this planet? He muttered, checking the coordinates. Lyra tilted her head. "Maybe it followed you," she said. "Maybe it still thinks you're on a mission." Ethan clenched his jaw. "If it detects you, it'll mark you as hostile. And if you're near me, it'll think I've defected." Lyra's eyes widened. "So both of us die." "Exactly," he said quietly. Outside, the night sky flickered with faint blue light. The drone was descending through the snowstorm, its scanning beams slicing through the dark like knives. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his chest. He turned off every light, every signal, until the pod went silent again. The air grew colder, the heater dying. He could hear the faint metallic whine of the drone as it hovered above. Lyra crouched beside him, whispering, "Your machines are more terrifying than ours." He smirked weakly. "They were built to survive anything." The ground trembled as the drone's landing gear touched the snow. Through the cracks in the metal wall, they could see its bright sensors scanning the wreckage. A red beam swept across the ice, stopping right outside the door. Ethan gripped his blaster tighter. Lyra's hand brushed his arm, a silent question. Fight or run? He didn't answer, he just nodded toward the back hatch. They moved slowly, every step cautious. The air inside the pod was so cold it hurt to breathe. Ethan opened the rear exit, the metal creaking softly. Outside, the storm was fierce, snow swirling like ghosts around them. They slipped into the blizzard, staying low behind them. The drone's red light turned toward the movement. It fired, a beam of energy slicing through the air, missing them by inches. The explosion lit the night, sending shards of ice into the sky. Lyra fell, the blast wave knocking her back. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a broken ridge. "Can you move?" he shouted. She nodded, pain flashing across her face. "I'll live." The drone's searchlights cut through the snow. Searching, scanning, hunting. Ethan checked his weapon, half charge left. He knew he couldn't destroy the drone with that. But maybe, just maybe, he could trick it. He looked around quickly and spotted a cluster of frozen metallic rocks. He pulled a small power cell from his gear and threw it toward the opposite side. It exploded in a flash of light, and the drone turned instantly, following the false signal. "Come on," he whispered, pulling Lyra along the ridge. They ran through the snow, boots sinking deep. Lungs burning, behind them the drone fired again, the ground erupting in waves of heat. The air shimmered with energy, and for a second, Ethan thought they wouldn't make it. Then Lyra stopped suddenly, pulling him down. "Wait," she said. "There's a cave there." He followed her gaze, barely visible through the snow, a dark opening in the cliffside. They stumbled toward it, hearts racing. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world outside vanished into white. Inside, the air was dry and silent. They collapsed to the ground. Breathing hard for a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of their breathing filled the space. Then Lyra looked up, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You could have left me," she said softly. "You could have run faster without me." Ethan shook his head, his voice rough. "That's not how we're built." Lyra studied him quietly, as if trying to understand. "You humans confuse me," she whispered. "You fight without mercy, yet show kindness without reason." He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe that's what makes us dangerous." Outside, the wind roared again. The drone hovered above, scanning, searching, but the cave's mineral walls blocked its sensors. They were safe. For now, Ethan leaned back against the cold stone. Staring at the dim light of his scanner, it was cracked, but it still worked. He saw faint readings deeper inside the cave. Heat signatures, weak but alive. He frowned. "We're not alone in here," he said quietly. Lyra tensed, her hand going to her plasma knife. They moved slowly deeper, every sound echoing. The tunnel twisted like a throat, walls glittering with ice and strange mineral light. After a few meters, they saw it. A faint blue glow flickering in the dark. Shapes moved, small and fast. Ethan raised his weapon, ready to fire, but then he froze, eyes widening. They weren't soldiers, they were children. Small Drellani children huddled together for warmth. Their eyes wide with fear. Lyra gasped, her voice barely a whisper. They're refugees." Ethan lowered his blaster slowly. The children stared at them, shivering, silent, and in that single moment, both Ethan and Lyra understood something powerful. This war had reached farther than either side had imagined. And survival was no longer about humans versus Drellani. It was about life itself. Outside. The drone scanners swept the land again inside the cave. A soldier and an alien shared a look, half fear, half hope. Neither spoke, but both knew one thing. Their fight had only just begun. The cave was silent except for the soft sound of breathing. Ethan's flashlight flickered weakly across the icy walls, revealing frightened faces hidden in the shadows. The children stared back, their glowing eyes wide, their skin pale blue under the frost. Lyra knelt slowly, lowering her weapon, her voice soft and trembling. "It's all right," she whispered. "We won't hurt you." The children didn't answer, only huddled closer together. Ethan looked at Lyra, his brows furrowed. "You know them?" She nodded slowly. "They're Drellani," she said, her tone filled with disbelief. "But why are they here?" Ethan glanced around the cave, noticing old supplies, broken canisters, pieces of metal and burned fabric. "They've been here a long time," he murmured. "Maybe survivors from another crash." Lyra's throat tightened, her memories flashing back to the last battle her fleet fought near this region. A transport ship full of civilians had gone missing. Lost in a storm like this, she had assumed they were dead. Now she knew the truth. They had been hiding, freezing, surviving in silence. One of the older children, a girl with silver marks on her skin, stepped forward carefully. Her voice was small but steady. "Are you soldiers?" Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore." Lyra hesitated, then said softly, "We came here by accident." The girl's gaze moved between them, unsure if she could trust them. Then, after a long pause, she pointed deeper into the cave. "Others are sick," she said. "They can't move." Ethan and Lyra exchanged a quick look, without a word. They followed the girl deeper into the cavern. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber where several more Drellani lay on the ground. Wrapped in thin cloth, their breathing was shallow, their skin dimming, their internal bioluminescence fading away. Lyra dropped to her knees beside them, her expression filled with pain. "They're dying," she whispered. "Their bodies can't handle this cold." Ethan's heart pounded. He knew the heater from the pod couldn't keep them all alive, but he refused to do nothing. He began checking his remaining supplies, rations, spare cells, heat modules. He could use one power core to create a temporary heat source. It wouldn't last long, but it could buy them time. He set it down, flicked a switch, and warm light spread across the cave. The children gasped softly, moving closer to the heat. Lyra looked at him in surprise. "Why do you keep helping us?" she asked quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Because that's what humans do," he said. "We help, even when it doesn't make sense." She stared at him for a moment, her heart heavy with emotion. Then she looked away, guilt rising in her chest. The silence was broken by a sudden noise, the faint buzz of a communicator. Lyra froze, her hand going to her wrist device. A soft blue light blinked. It was an incoming signal from her fleet. She hesitated, then answered, her voice low. "This is Scout Lyra," she said. "Reporting." The voice that replied was cold and commanding. "Scout, we detected human movement near your last coordinates," the officer said. "Confirm and eliminate." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes moved to Ethan, standing beside the children, trying to repair a damaged heater. "Understood," she said weakly, her voice trembling. "Transmit your location," the officer continued. "A retrieval team will arrive shortly." Lyra swallowed hard, her mind spinning. If she sent her coordinates, Ethan and the refugees would all die. If she refused, she would be branded a traitor. This was the moment, the decision she had been dreading. She turned off the communicator and sat in silence. Ethan noticed her expression and frowned. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer, just stared at him. "You heard them, didn't you?" he said quietly. She nodded slowly. "They're coming." He sighed. "Then we move." She looked up sharply. "No," she said. "You can't fight them. They'll kill you." He smiled faintly. "They'll have to find me first." Ethan began packing his gear. He turned to Lyra. "Take the kids deeper into the cave," he said. "I'll distract them." Lyra's voice broke. "You'll die." He looked at her calmly. "Maybe, but they won't." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her chest tightened, and something inside her cracked. In that instant, she saw what made humans truly dangerous. It wasn't their weapons, it was their hearts. As Ethan walked toward the exit, she grabbed his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "You don't have to do this alone." He met her eyes. Those glowing golden eyes filled with fear and fire. "You'd be turning against your own," he said softly. Lyra's voice shook. "Maybe it's time someone did." Before he could reply, the sound of engines thundered overhead. Blue lights flashed outside the cave entrance, growing brighter by the second. The Drellani retrieval ship had arrived, scanning the ground below. Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster. Lyra stepped beside him, her plasma knife igniting in a pale green flame. Two enemies now stood side by side, ready to fight the same battle. The air in the cave trembled with energy as the first blast hit the ground. The children screamed, the walls shook, and dust fell like snow from the ceiling. Ethan took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Stay behind me," he said, "and whatever happens, don't stop running." Lyra nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. The cold wind screamed louder outside, but inside the cave, something else was burning. Courage. And as the light of the enemy's ship flooded through the cave's mouth, Ethan and Lyra stood together, ready to face the storm. The cave shook like a living thing, the ground groaning as another blast struck the frozen surface above. Snow fell from the ceiling in a glittering storm. Coating everything in white dust, Ethan braced himself against the wall, shielding one of the smaller Drellani children from falling debris. Lyra stood beside him, her plasma blade humming, its soft green glow slicing through the shadows. Outside, the roar of engines echoed through the storm. Searchlights swept across the ice, cutting through the darkness like knives of blue fire. The enemy ship had landed, and soldiers were already moving toward the cave entrance. Ethan's scanner blinked red, picking up multiple life signs approaching fast. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice low but firm. Lyra nodded, her jaw tight. "There's another exit deeper inside through the tunnels." She turned to the children, her voice calm and steady. "Everyone stay close, and don't make a sound." They moved quickly, their footsteps soft on the icy ground. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The air grew heavy and warm, almost unnaturally so. Ethan frowned. Glancing at the scanner again, there was heat below them moving, something massive. "Something alive, Lyra," he whispered. "There's something under us." She looked down, confusion flashing in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the ground trembled violently. A deep rumble rolled through the cave, followed by a sound that was not mechanical but alive. It was a roar, low, deep, and ancient. The children screamed as cracks began to split the ice beneath their feet. Ethan grabbed Lyra and pulled her back just as the floor erupted. A massive creature burst from the ice, its scales glistening with frost. It was huge, serpentine with a body made of dark, glassy crystal and muscle. Its eyes glowed like molten amber, and steam rose from its mouth with every breath. "The hell is that?" Ethan shouted, raising his blaster. Lyra's voice shook. "An ice worm," she said, "a guardian beast." "This planet's oldest predator," the worm roared again, shaking the cavern so hard that icicles shattered from the ceiling. It lunged toward the nearest heat source, the glowing plasma blade in Lyra's hand. Ethan fired, blue bolts cutting across the air. The shots hit the creature's armor and ricocheted, barely leaving scorch marks. Lyra jumped aside, slashing at its snout. Leaving a glowing wound, the beast roared in fury, its tail smashing against the wall and sending a shockwave through the chamber. "Get the kids back." Ethan yelled. Lyra nodded, shouting something in her own language, and the children scattered into the deeper tunnels. The worm turned its massive head toward Ethan, its nostrils flaring. He could feel its heat now, like standing in front of a furnace. He kept firing, moving, dodging chunks of falling ice. Every shot seemed useless, but he refused to stop. Lyra rejoined him, panting. "We can't kill it," she said. "It feeds on energy. It's drawn to power." Ethan's eyes widened. "Then it's coming for the ship's reactor." She blinked, realizing what he meant. "If it reaches them, it'll destroy everything," he finished. They both turned toward the faint light at the far end of the tunnel, the exit that led to the surface. The worm roared again and began burrowing upward, chasing the source of the strongest energy it could sense, the enemy ship. Ethan and Lyra ran after it, the ground splitting behind them. The ice cracked and hissed as the creature moved like a living earthquake. When they reached the mouth of the cave, the blizzard nearly blinded them. The Drellani soldiers were already there, weapons raised, shouting orders. They saw Ethan and opened fire immediately, bolts of light streaking through the storm. Lyra jumped in front of him, deflecting the shots with her plasma blade, sparks flying. "Stop!" she screamed in her native tongue. "You don't understand." But it was too late. The ground beneath the soldiers exploded, sending them flying through the air. The worm burst from below, larger than anything Ethan had ever seen. Its jaws opened wide, releasing a blast of superheated air that melted the ice in seconds. The ship above them shook violently as the creature coiled around it. Engines screamed, lights flickered, and the sky filled with smoke and fire. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her away, running through the chaos behind them. The worm crushed the ship like a toy, its body glowing with stolen energy. The explosion lit up the entire sky, turning the snowstorm into a wave of blue fire. They dove behind a ridge as the shockwave rolled over them. Ethan covered Lyra with his body, the heat searing his back. When it was over, everything was silent again. Slowly, Ethan lifted his head, the air thick with smoke and steam. Where the ship had been, there was now only a crater of glowing ice. The worm was gone, buried deep beneath the surface once more. Lyra sat up, coughing, her face streaked with frost and ash. Her voice was faint. "It killed them all." Ethan nodded, staring into the crater. "It saved us." She looked at him, confused. "You think it did that on purpose?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but sometimes the universe doesn't need a reason." The wind began to rise again, carrying the scent of burned metal and ozone. Lyra turned to him, her golden eyes bright in the dark. "Ethan," she whispered, "your people will come next, won't they?" He sighed. "If that drone sent a signal before it died." "Yes." She looked away, her voice heavy with fear. "Then we have little time." He nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. "Then we use what we have left." The cold night settled again over the broken landscape. 2 survivors, 1 human and 1 alien, walking through the ruins of 2 fallen armies. The stars above were distant and silent. But somewhere beneath their feet the worm stirred again, and the ice whispered as if the planet itself was watching, waiting for their next move. The storm had quieted, but the silence that followed was worse than the noise. The sky was gray, the air heavy with ash and frost. Ethan and Lyra stood on the edge of the crater, the remains of the Drellani ship glowing faintly beneath the ice. Steam rose from the molten cracks, twisting into the cold wind like ghosts. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The children had been led to safety deeper in the caves, hidden away where the cold couldn't reach them. Now only the 2 of them remained on the surface. Ethan's armor was burned and cracked, his blaster half melted. Lyra's face was pale, her golden eyes dim, but her will was strong. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You did well back there," he said softly. Lyra looked at him, her voice quiet. "I did what I had to do." He nodded. "That's all any of us ever do." The wind whispered through the broken ice, carrying faint static, a sound that made Ethan's heart tighten. He pulled his scanner from his belt, the display flickering weakly. A faint blue pulse blinked across the screen. Another signal, This time the frequency was unmistakably human. Lyra frowned. More of your drones? Ethan shook his head slowly. No, he said. That's a distress beacon. She tilted her head. From your people? Yes, he said, his voice uncertain. Or what's left of them. The signal was getting stronger. Ethan adjusted the scanner, triangulating its direction. It's not far, he said. A few clicks east. Lyra hesitated, her instincts screaming caution. If they find me with you, she said quietly, they'll shoot me on sight. Ethan's eyes softened. Then we don't let them find you. They moved across the frozen plain, their footsteps crunching softly underfoot. The cold bit into their faces, but they kept going above them. The faint light of dawn broke through the clouds, the first sunlight they had seen in days. As they neared the signal source, Ethan slowed. Crouching low behind a ridge, smoke rose from a wreck in the distance, a human dropship, half buried in snow. He could see movement. 3 figures wearing heavy survival suits, armed and scanning the perimeter. Rescue team, he whispered. They must have picked up my crash signal. Lyra stayed hidden, her breathing shallow. Ethan turned to her. Stay here, he said softly. She grabbed his arm, her voice firm. Be careful, he smiled faintly. Always, he stepped out into the open, waving his arm. Hey, he shouted. It's Lieutenant Ethan Hale, Reconnaissance Unit 7. The soldiers turned instantly, weapons raised, then lowered slightly as one of them recognized him. Lieutenant Hale? You're alive? The leader shouted, walking toward him. Ethan nodded. Barely, he said, forcing a tired smile. The leader removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and sharp eyes. Captain Reeves, Ethan said in surprise. I thought your team was on the other side of the sector. Reeves smirked. We were until command picked up your beacon. He looked around, his tone changing. Where's the alien signature we detected? Ethan froze for a heartbeat. He knew exactly what Reeves meant. Lyra was watching from behind the ridge, hidden. His mind raced. He couldn't tell the truth, but lying to Reeves was dangerous too. I destroyed the ship, Ethan said calmly. No survivors. Reeves studied him, eyes narrow. That's strange, he said. Command said the energy surge came from an alien life form. Ethan's jaw tightened. I handled it, he said. Trust me. Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then smiled thinly. I do trust you, Lieutenant, he said. I just don't trust what you bring back with you. Before Ethan could respond, a sharp beep echoed from Reeves's wrist display. He tapped it, and a holographic image flickered to life, Lyra's face, recorded from drone footage before the explosion. Reeves's expression hardened. You want to explain this? Ethan's stomach dropped. That was before, he said quickly. She's gone. Reeves raised a brow. Gone? Ethan nodded. The creature killed her. Reeves didn't reply, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then he gave a small smirk. Funny thing about scanners, he said. They don't lie. Ethan's heart stopped. Reeves pointed toward the ridge. Lyra stood there, visible now, the wind tugging at her hair, her golden eyes glowing faintly. The soldiers turned instantly. Weapons drawn, Ethan shouted, Wait! Don't shoot! But Reeves gave the order coldly. Fire, blaster bolts cut through the air. Ethan moved before he could think. Diving in front of Lyra, shielding her with his body, he felt the heat of the blast burn through his shoulder armor. Lyra cried out, catching him as he fell. Stop! She screamed, her voice echoing through the cold air. A burst of green energy erupted from her hands, knocking the soldiers back with a wave of light. Reeves hit the ground hard, his weapon sliding away. Ethan groaned, pain flooding his body. Lyra's eyes blazed like molten suns, her voice trembling with fury. Why do you always destroy what you don't understand? She shouted. Reeves spat blood, glaring up at her. Because understanding you isn't part of the mission. Ethan tried to speak, his voice weak. Lyra, don't... But she didn't listen. The air shimmered around her as energy crackled through her veins. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Lyra stopped, her glow fading. She looked at Ethan, her face full of pain and conflict. I don't want to become like them, she whispered. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hand over his wound, her healing light glowing faintly. Reeves coughed, slowly standing. He picked up his weapon, aiming it once more. You're under arrest, Lieutenant, he said coldly. For aiding an alien enemy. Ethan's vision blurred, but he smiled weakly. She's not the enemy, he whispered. Reeves hesitated. his finger tightening on the trigger. Then the ground trembled again, the ice cracked. The crater behind them began to collapse. A deep roar echoed from below. The worm was not finished. Everyone turned as the ground split open once more. The storm screamed back to life. And light burst from the ice. The battle was far from over. The roar of the worm shook the air like thunder. The frozen ground split open as light poured from beneath the ice. Heat, steam, and sound collided into chaos. Ethan, Lyra, and Captain Reeves were thrown backward. Crashing into the snow, the crater glowed blue, the surface rippling like boiling water. The monstrous creature rose again, its crystal scales blazing with the energy it had stolen from the destroyed ships. Each movement made the earth tremble. The humans had built weapons for war, but nothing they had could stop something this ancient. The worm was awake now and angry. Ethan struggled to his feet, clutching his shoulder, blood freezing against his armor. His vision blurred. But his instincts screamed, run, fight, survive. Lyra helped him stand. Her golden eyes wide with fear and determination. Reeves shouted into his comm. Command. This is Alpha Team. Unknown biological entity, level Omega threat. Static answered, nothing more. The storm was blocking all transmissions. They were on their own. The worm turned toward them. Its massive head lowering, steam hissed from its nostrils, and its molten eyes focused on the tiny figures before it. Lyra whispered, It's feeding again. Ethan frowned. Feeding? She nodded. On energy, life, warmth, it doesn't just hunt. It absorbs. Ethan's gaze dropped to the power core clipped to his belt. Glowing faintly, he understood immediately. Reeves pointed his blaster toward Lyra, shouting, This is your fault. You brought this thing here. Ethan turned furious. She saved us. She's an alien. Reeves snapped back. She's manipulating you. Lyra stared at him, anger and sadness in her voice. You humans destroy what you fear. Reeves aimed his gun. And you monsters hide behind pity. Before he could fire, the worm's tail slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave that split the ice between them. The earth itself roared, cutting off their argument. Chunks of frozen debris flew into the air. Ethan and Lyra stumbled backward, the heat from the creature's breath melting the snow around them. We can't kill it, Ethan shouted over the noise. But maybe we can stop it, Lyra looked at him sharply. How? Ethan held up the glowing power core. It wants energy, right? Let's give it more than it can handle. Lyra's eyes widened. That core is unstable. If it overloads, it'll explode. He nodded. Exactly, Reeves overheard, his eyes full of disbelief. You'll kill us all. Ethan looked at him calmly. If we don't, there'll be nothing left anyway. For a long moment, no one moved. The worm bellowed again, its voice echoing across the ice like a storm of fire. Then Lyra stepped forward, placing her hand on Ethan's chest. You can't go alone, she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. You've already done enough. Her eyes glowed brighter. Not yet. Together they ran toward the creature. Reeves shouted after them, but his voice was lost in the roar of wind and thunder. The worm lunged, its massive jaws snapping shut just behind them. Ethan dodged left. Lyra rolled right, both moving like shadows across the frozen field. Ethan climbed a ridge of ice, pulling the power core from his belt. It hummed louder, glowing dangerously bright. Lyra covered him, deflecting falling debris with her plasma blade. Now, she shouted. Ethan threw the core straight into the creature's open mouth. For one silent heartbeat, the world froze, then came the explosion. A blinding white light burst from the worm's throat, tearing through its body like lightning. The sound was deafening, a storm breaking apart the sky. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the stars. Its body cracked and shattered, fragments of glowing ice and crystal flying in every direction. The shockwave threw Ethan and Lyra back, the light swallowing everything. When the world settled again, there was only silence. The worm was gone, its body buried beneath tons of smoking ice. The air shimmered with heat, and faint sparks drifted upward like fireflies. Lyra coughed, her hands shaking. She looked around, then saw Ethan lying nearby. Unmoving, she crawled to him, pulling him into her arms. His armor was cracked, his face pale, but his eyes opened slowly. Still here? He whispered, a weak smile forming. Lyra nodded, tears mixing with frost. For now. Reeves limped toward them, his helmet gone, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few steps away, staring at the crater where the worm had died. You saved us, he said softly. Almost in disbelief, Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Guess that makes 2 miracles today. Reeves looked at Lyra, his voice low. What happens now? She met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with quiet strength. Now, she said. You stop seeing us as enemies. Reeves said nothing, but he didn't raise his weapon again. The wind began to calm, the storm breaking apart to reveal a pale dawn. Lyra stood slowly, still holding Ethan. As the first rays of sunlight touched the snow, they glowed faintly golden. She whispered a soft prayer in her language, a promise to remember, not to hate. Ethan's voice was faint but steady. Lyra, he said, if they ask what happened here. She looked down at him, her hand brushing his face. I'll tell them the truth, she said. A human saved me, and together we saved everyone. He smiled weakly. That's all that matters. His eyes closed as the light brightened across the horizon. Lyra held him close, her tears falling silently. The sky turned crimson and gold, and somewhere deep beneath the ice the planet sighed, as if the storm itself was finally at peace. Later, when the rescue ships arrived, they found only one survivor, an alien woman kneeling beside a human's grave. The snow around her shimmered softly, glowing with the warmth of something far greater than fire. Because in that frozen world, one truth remained clear. Sometimes, humanity isn't about being human. It's about acting human.